Our presentation hopes to deconstruct the issues surrounding the possibility of using GMOs as a sustainable alternative to increased food supply. With an expected population of about 9 billion people in the world in 2050, there is a clear need for more efficient and effective ways to produce enough food to adequately feed the global population. The food supply chain, FSC, provides enough food to feed everyone in the world, but with the rising population, the strain of producing food at such a scale is creating many negative side effects that are unsustainable, such as soil erosion, lack of arable land, and overuse of pesticides and herbicides. Additionally, climate change is also putting a strain on our food supply chain. GMOs could be the solution to this problem. Genetically modified organisms, more commonly known as GMOs, are organisms that have had their genome modified to produce a desirable trait or to produce a desirable biological product. Together, these traits produce higher yield rates than conventional crops. In a recent 7-year study, it was found that the implementation of GM crops increased the yield per acre by 24% and profits by 50%. Right now, the U.S.'s lenient laws on GMOs provide an excellent condition for the GMO market to flourish. In America, the companies that produce GM crops are the entities that actually conduct and oversee the research about the safety of the new GMO products. The FDA does not conduct any independent research. This speeds up the whole process of approving a new GM crop. GMOs first were approved for marketing in the U.S. in 1994 and have been largely successful with global soybean, cotton, and maize adoption rates at around 77%, 49%, and 26% respectively. However, a social stigma against GMOs has been gradually growing, which could impact the future growth of GM crops. The biggest movement in America right now is GMO labeling. GMO companies will incur massive costs if labeling becomes mandatory, which will stunt the industry, making it difficult for GMOs to reach full sustainability. No new GMO crops have been approved in Europe since October 1998. The reason for this is that the approval laws in Europe make it basically impossible for GM foods to be allowed on the European market. A reason for this deviation is the social stigma against GMOs in Europe. During this time, the majority of Europeans believed that GMOs were harmful, and 85% wanted stricter regulations. Even now, it is just as bad. In 2010, 23% of respondents of the Eurobarometer survey responded positively about GMOs. This is hurting the GMO industry in Europe. A Swiss company called Syngenta also moved its research to the United States. Monsanto sued Germany for banning GMOs, arguing that Germany's ban was unlawful. Complaints were also filed to the World Trade Organization by the US, Canada, and Argentina. They argue that this ban was not scientifically justified and hindered the effort to fix world hunger. The impacts of GMOs on both human health and the environment are the two areas of greatest concern and controversy regarding the effects of GMOs. One benefit of GM pesticide and herbicide-resistant crops is that the reduction in overall herbicide and pesticide use. It is estimated that there has been a 172 million kilogram reduction of pesticide use since 1996 due to the implementation of GM crops, which is about a 6% overall decrease. One added benefit of reduced herbicide and pesticide use is that it leads to decreased fuel use and a lower greenhouse gas emission, which reduces the overall environmental footprint associated with crop production. GM crops also have lowered the need for energy-intensive cultivation. They make overall management of weeds and insects easier as a result of herbicide and pesticide-resistant GM crops. This allows farmers to use reduced or no-tillage systems, which entail less soil maintenance and land preparation. Reduced tillage systems are not only beneficial to farmers because they leave more time for harvesting additional crops and thus boost profits, but they're also beneficial to the environment because of the use of less energy-intensive cultivation practices that lead to reduced soil erosion, better soil quality, and reduced fuel use in cultivation. However, it is also believed that the widespread cultivation of transgenic herbicide and pesticide-resistant crops could lead to the creation of super pests and super diseases over time because of the intense natural selection pressures that GM crops would place on pest and pathogen populations to rapidly adapt. This would lead to the formation of super pests and super diseases, which would require higher doses of stronger pesticides to do the same job that previously required less. There are also concerns regarding the hybridization of GM crops with sexually compatible native plant species through horizontal gene transfer, HGT, which is the expression of genetic material following the flow of genetic information directly to a living cell or an organism. While HGT is a natural evolutionary process, concerns exist about whether gene flow from GM crops to native weed species could possibly build up herbicide resistance in these weeds, making them pervasive and hard to control. One of the largest and overarching concerns regarding the environmental impacts of GMOs is their potential adverse effect on ecosystem biodiversity, and the possibility of GM crops or their hybrid counterparts invading natural habitats and outcompeting the native plant species. However, when looking at the potential adverse effects of GM crops on the environment, it is highly important to assess whether they differ from the negative effects posed by conventional crops. Now we're going to look at the possible health impacts imposed by GM food products. One major area of concern regarding GMOs is their potential to elicit an allergic response in humans. The major concern for allergens in GM crops is how they will affect the workers and those in close proximity to the pollen of the GM crops. It is important, though, to assess if the allergenic potential of GM crops is somehow different from that of conventional foods. The most likely areas of concern regarding the safety risks of GMOs are their potential to lead to negative health effects brought on by the toxins in the pollen released from the GM crops, like discussed before, or exposure to the toxic GM crop residues. The major safety concern here is that consumers ingesting GM food products could possibly be exposed to harmful or toxic residues found in their food. However, there haven't been any scientific assessments done regarding the chronic health effects of pesticide residues and other potentially toxic residues from GMOs on human health. Genetically modified crops are promising based on their potential to greatly increase crop yields, and they also offer a cost-effective solution in conjunction with conventional agricultural practices to the current strains that a rapidly growing population and a changing climate are putting on the world's food supply. We have found that the positive environmental impacts, like the positive effects GM crops have on reducing soil erosion and greenhouse gas emissions, currently outweigh the supposed health and environmental drawbacks of GMOs. These supposed negative impacts on human health and the environment are outcomes that are largely unknown because they can really only be evaluated or measured in the long run. Thus, conclusions can't be made yet regarding the validity of these assumptions. The GMO industry is one that is constantly changing, and if shortcomings regarding the long-term impacts of GMOs, such as negative health trends or the creation of superpests, arise, then the viability of GMOs as a sustainable alternative must be reassessed and new conclusions can be made. Thank you.